Hello, I'm Bill O'Donnell, and welcome to another program on spirituality. Today in the studio, we're embarking on part 2 of our discussion with Brother Brian Dybowski from the Santa Fe Institute for Spirituality at the College of Santa Fe on the spirituality of Gandhi. Welcome back, brother.
Thank you. Good to be here.
So, just to confuse you who saw it last week, we changed sides and changed my tie, just so you didn't think it was a rerun, because Brian doesn't change his clothes except for when he takes a shower and cleans them. But in any case, we're here in getting deep into Mahatma Gandhi's teachings that have a lot to offer us today, particularly with nonviolence and his integration of his background in Hinduism and yet being influenced by Jesus and the New Testament, and also his study of the Quran and Islam. So welcome back, Brother Brian.
Good to be here.
I also want to give credit to Brother Brian. This was his idea to do that spirituality, and we talked about his life, but tell the people again why you chose to do Gandhi at this time.
Well, it seems to be a time when we need more consideration of peace. And Gandhi did that in such a remarkable way that reviewing what he did and what he said about it can be inspiring.
Yeah. I was particularly impressed with your comments about him being a good Hindu and growing up a Hindu and then reading the New Testament and being influenced by the teachings of Jesus and Jesus' life and realizing that there were parts of Hinduism that he actually improved for himself by taking action as opposed to just allowing the law of karma to dictate in people's lives. And I thought that was a really important thing to talk about. Carrying on from where we were before, there was also some other things that I noticed in the work that you have developed in anticipation of this 16-hour course that you're giving at the Institute for Spirituality on Gandhi's spirituality, about his reliance on prayer and meditation. Could you talk a little bit about that to get us started?
Sure. Gandhi spent many hours of every day praying, meditating, considering in a very deep way what it is that God is, what man is, how the two relate to each other. And it's in this prayer, this tremendous amount of prayer, that he was able to integrate everything that made his life so effective.
And I get the impression that he felt that to not pray was almost like what we'd call a sin of omission.
Definitely, yeah. Yeah, you see, what he discovered, particularly by his own very intense prayer life, is that what he had been doing without praying had been largely illusion. And that's a big part of the Hindu way of looking at things. To overcome illusion is the whole purpose of life. So prayer, as the way of doing that, prayer enables the person to be real as opposed to being fantastic.
Yeah. And I know you did a lot of reading and you studied in Rome back in '92 and with an Indian priest and some others, and you've been studying Gandhi ever since. In many of the books that you have studied, was it consistent throughout that your comment about Gandhi stating that that he was a Hindu and he was a Christian and he was a Muslim, among others, is it consistent that his action was a distillation of all these teachings?
Definitely. What Gandhi did was to accept in a very friendly way all of the important things that the various religions had to say.
And he transcended their limited aspect. For instance, you were talking earlier about how he overcame the law of karma, because the law of karma would have indicated to do something good for someone else might interfere with their karma. And he wasn't exactly rejecting. How would you characterize that?
Yes, he didn't reject anything in Hinduism or in the other religions. He merely integrated all of the good things in all of the religions. And it's that kind of transcending integration, see, which we would be looking at in enough detail for us to pick up on how he did it.
And in Christianity, I think the predominant view of God is God as love. And yet he accepted that, but he preferred the aspect of God as truth. Could you develop that a little bit for us?
Sure. You see, Gandhi had a very clear expression of how all of this worked. He pointed out that too many people consider love to be some kind of carnal engagement. And of course that distracts a lot of people from what love really is. Now, in order to avoid that particular difficulty, Gandhi proposed that God is truth. And the truth is so important to everybody who gets past the adolescent rebellion stage that it's a great way to get started on God. So if you come at God as if God were the truth, then you are so busy pursuing the truth, and you get into the prayer to get at the truth, and then you discover the sense in which God is truly love.
Yeah. And yet he had differences with Christianity. Can you outline what they were?
Mm-hmm. Yes, very definitely. He was opposed to the notion that Jesus is the only incarnation of God. In the Hindu process, there were several proposed incarnations of God. And because of these various incarnations of God that he accepted, he was willing to say that Jesus was another one. But our position is that Jesus is the only one.
Yeah.
And Gandhi did not agree with that.
I have to tell you, in my own experience that I mentioned in the previous segment, that I had studied and practiced some Hinduism in my day, and I learned more about Jesus from Hindu gurus than I had been able to accept or realize as a young person growing up. And so I never found one that didn't revere and have a high appreciation for Jesus. And then I'm reminded that in the Quran, Muhammad claimed that Jesus was the highest, prophet before him. And so there is, it seems that at a certain level of maturity and growth in spirituality, that you develop a greater appreciation for all the expressions of God, it seems. Is that a fair thing to say?
Oh, very definitely, yes. You see, that's the kind of thing that Gandhi emphasized, and he did it right out of his prayer experience. See, his pursuit of truth, his notion of the absolute truth in which all of the things that could be considered disagreements dissolve. See, this kind of integrity of truth that kept him going enabled him to see very clearly that whatever some human being has misinterpreted about some various religion tends to become the whole thing for them, because they aren't very prayerful, they don't proceed through all of these difficulties, they get hung up right there. So what he's emphasizing is that with the importance of prayer, with the way that prayer becomes central to your life, then you gradually overcome these hang-ups.
Yeah, thank you for refreshing my memory with a lot of the materials that you have made available for the people in your classes. And I was also struck by how it developed. I mean, prayer led to faith. Tell us about what Gandhi thought about faith.
Gandhi thought that faith was the most important thing a human being does. You see, it's possible to imagine that there's a little bit going on and that there's a little bit that we might learn, like how to drive a car and how to follow all of the traffic rules, that this is the whole of life. And for a teenager, that may be the most important thing, but the teenager rather quickly discovers that there's much more to life. And what is the more? It is not known. And since we do not know in advance what's going to happen next, the only way to approach what's coming next is by faith.
Yeah. But he went on, to say how prayer and faith develop. And I was especially taken by how it helps you improve as a person. There's real benefit to this. This is not just pie in the sky stuff. This is, talk a little bit about that.
Sure. Yeah, it works a lot better than anything we know in psychology. And since the other thing that I studied was psychology and worked on that through a doctorate program and teach it on a regular basis, it's very clear that what Gandhi was doing and the result in his own personality was greater improvement through faith than anything psychology can offer.
And so the way that faith and prayer come together, and then he took it that step further and took it into action, which was truly beyond traditional Hinduism, wasn't it?
Right. And you see, this is the way that Gandhi made peace. First of all, he made peace in his soul. See, the big problem here is that I cannot encourage two people who are fighting with each other to lay down their arms and become friends unless that is my primary conviction. And I'm not going to get there unless I have a very active prayer life. And unless I believe that these people who are busy fighting with each other can do it. So it's the integration of my prayer or being real, my ability to see beyond the sensory, which is where it gets all confusing, and my commitment to peace. All has to fit together. And once it's integral, then it's possible to help other people achieve peace.
So let's talk about that, because he is, most famous, I think, at least in the West, for his stand on nonviolence and how he stood up to the British Empire, in effect, that ruled India for hundreds of years and changed their culture dramatically. Introduce us a little bit to the nonviolence of Gandhi.
Mm-hmm. Yes, what Gandhi did for the British was to love them and to commit himself in faith to believe that these people who hadn't shown themselves previously to be very peaceful could become peaceful. See, it was out of his prayer and out of his faith that he recognized that if he treated these people peacefully, in spite of the fact that they had made their British Empire by conquest, that they would abandon conquest, that they would quit killing his people, several thousand of whom they did kill in the process. See, it took him over 30 years to convince the representatives of the British government that to enforce, was a mistake, and that what they needed to do would be to make the best use of their Christian background. Jesus came to bring peace.
Yeah, listen, if you've just joined us, we're having a conversation, part 2, with Brother Brian Dybowski of the Santa Fe Institute for Spirituality at the College of Santa Fe, which provides courses every summer for the last 18 years. And this year he is teaching a 15-hour segment on Gandhi and his spirituality. And I can tell you from just looking over the material that Brother Brian has developed for the class, it's going to be a remarkable class. There's so much here, I'm just amazed at it. So if you've just joined us, I encourage you also to go to the website at www.sfis.org. The first letters of the Santa Fe Institute for Spirituality. S as in Sam, F as in Frank, I, and S as in Sam.org. And you'll see the program for whatever's going on currently at the Institute for Spirituality, and also the phone number there that you can call to find out more information, and to know that it's also open for all. A donation is requested, but none will be required for your attendance. So, Brother Brian, you, as we said in the first segment, you're a Roman Catholic Christian brother, and it seems somewhat unusual for you to have chosen Mahatma Gandhi and his spirituality as a way of encouraging people in their spiritual life. Why did you do that?
Well, primarily I did that because in America at this time, with or without the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, there's a great deal of violence. There are hundreds of millions of people who've given up on the recommendations of Christ to treat each other kindly and with love and faith to establish peace on earth. Now, because of that, it's a very good corrective to look at what Gandhi did. And Gandhi, in this respect, is a much better Christian than most of us.
Yeah, I love that when you said that, because it's so true. He loved Christ, but he wasn't so impressed with us as Christians or how we live out those teachings, was he? Yeah. And he loved India and he loved Hinduism, but he saw its shortcomings in practice as well. Isn't that true? Did he speak much about Islam? Because he worked originally with a lot of Indian Muslims early in the game, and we'll get to that later. But what was your impression of his study of Islam and its teachings?
Right. Well, he did a very thorough study of Islam. without devoting a tremendous amount of time to it. He read the Quran. He talked with a lot of other people. Every time that he met with people of different religious backgrounds, he asked to begin with a prayer. So if he was meeting with Muslims, it was a Muslim prayer, and he was able to coordinate with that and to love Allah in the way that the Muslims loved Allah. And in a sense, quite a few of his Islamic friends pointed out that he was doing a better job than they were. And in this sense, Gandhi was a better follower of Islam than the people who were busy doing that.
Yeah.
Now, at his time, there were 400 million citizens of India, and 100 million of them were Islamic. So he identified with them in this important way of being such a good follower of Islam. And he thought that that was the basic way to do it. You cannot expect other people to do what you have not done. So if he's going to speak to the people of Islam, he's going to have to become Islamic in an outstanding way. And many of their people acknowledged that.
Yeah. And of course, as we know, he was instrumental in the development of the modern India and the independence of India. And although I don't believe he was in favor of the separation of the Islamic states away from Islam, he was still certainly influential in reducing some of the terrible violence that took place as a result of the, say, less than consciousness that was demonstrated afterwards. And that seems to be it, isn't it? I mean, he talked about that in your materials. You talked about consciousness and his reference to it as being divine, isn't it? I mean, in your search for God and his search for God, he demonstrated going beyond his own basic Hindu training to embrace Christianity and Islam and other sects, to develop himself as a better human being for himself, his family, and the people around him. Is that a fair statement to make about Gandhi?
Oh, definitely. See, what Gandhi did was to recognize that we are all children of God. In fact, that's the term that he applied to the untouchables, that these are God's creatures, that is undeniable. And as God's creatures, they are his children. God is the Father. So he developed that aspect, which is a part of every one of the major religions represented in India. And because he was able to do that, he was able to identify with the most important goals and purposes of every person in India.
And we know from experience, and you did say in the previous segment of how accurate you thought the more famous movie of Gandhi was, and that it was a fair representation of his life, even though it was a kind of a Hollywood production. I would be remiss if I didn't, in talking about his nonviolence, talk about his experience of love, because he also taught about love, didn't he? And that would be unusual for a Hindu to talk about love.
Indeed it was. And that's another one of the reasons why he started off by talking about God is truth and truth is God. But he developed the notion of love largely because of what he had read in the New Testament, that he was so impressed by the way that Jesus loved people, that he realized this is very important. But he also realized that it is hard to achieve. Now, it's hard enough to achieve a notion of truth, so he came at it that way. But what he discovered is that if he loved other people, it was like shining upon them the light and the warmth of God himself. And under that light and warmth, people began to thaw out, and to raise up, and to begin to get into a relationship to God, which we are all built for. And once he could do that, once he could love other people, then he considered that to be the overwhelming force, that love is the force no one wants to resist. And he applied it even to a Hindu who was trying to choke him to death. He just completely went limp in the Hindu's hands. And he smiled at this Hindu, and he loved this Hindu into quitting choking Gandhi.
And that's, so he obviously learned that from Jesus then, presumably. Yeah. And that's the tactics he used in South Africa and in India. And refresh our young people at home, particularly who don't understand the connection with Gandhi and our own civil rights movement here in this country and the peace movement.
Right. See, one of the most effective people in helping with civil rights was Dr. Martin Luther King. Okay? And he studied what Gandhi had done, and he organized everything he did that way. And he recognized that those people who are really committed to achieving the rights for anybody who's being oppressed is going to get into the love dynamic. Mm-hmm. And if the person does it by loving the people who are setting the hounds upon them, by loving the people who are bludgeoning you to unconsciousness and some to death, see, to love the people who are going to lynch you because you're doing something uppity, see, it's this love which will make the difference.
Yeah. I think it's interesting that this Hindu studies this Jew, Jesus, who creates Christianity, and then Dr. Martin Luther King, the Protestant minister, studies this Hindu man to affect these changes that have really changed our country in our lifetime.
Yeah. See, anything that you want to get done which is positive needs to begin and to unfold in a positive way. And the most positive of all is love.
Yeah. And yet, we still have a long way to go, don't we?
Well, individually, yes, we are straggling behind.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Why is it that that people today are not taking the lessons of history? I mean, you've been a teacher at every level, at high school and college, for many years, and you've seen young people come and go. Mm-hmm. What is it? Why is it that people aren't learning from these great men and the work that they've done, and women who've struggled and died, you know, for future generations' benefits?
Well, people today are making the same mistake they made in Gandhi's time, and that is that they take the loudest for the most important, and the most flashing, most attractive visual array as if it were what really counted. And these things are, for the most part, illusions, fantasies, which have no value whatsoever. But for someone growing up with them, particularly a poor kid who was parked in front of a TV set, you know, they've got nothing else to go on. So what Gandhi asked these people to do would be to forsake the sensory. See, that is the enemy. And he wrote beautiful things about that, some of which are quoted here, and some of which we will look into. Right? But the point is to get over the sensory illusions and to go to what satisfies. And for this, Gandhi would recommend to the young people who came to his ashram that they consider the results of all of that sensory activity. Pain, sorrow, it failed to fulfill. Now, what really would fulfill is going to be something beyond the sensory.
Right. And Hinduism talks about the illusion, the Maya, the illusion of life, and the New Testament talks about, you know, seek first the kingdom of God, and all things will be added unto you. And those are true, aren't they?
Right.
And so that's, I guess, the point of what we're doing here today is sharing with Brother Brian Dybowski of the Institute for Spirituality. To the whole purpose of Spirituality TV is to encourage you in your spiritual life, to recognize its importance in your life and not to be overly distracted by the things around you. And I believe that's why the Institute for Spirituality is here, and other such groups and organizations, so that there are opportunities for you to get with like-minded people. Leave your friends behind who don't want to be a part of your growth, and don't be distracted by what the media is calling you to do, with perhaps the exception of this program and others who are trying to go beyond that and using the very medium that's probably one of the #1 distractors, at least in our culture. You know, in the few minutes that we have left, Brother Brian, what else would you like to share with us about Gandhi and his importance today, and why it's important to study him and others and the New Testament for developing everyone's lives?
Well, Gandhi is an inspiring practitioner of prayer. Gandhi reminds us that we are all capable of growing to the level that he attained. Gandhi shows us that someone who was a very shy and introverted and frightened young man can grow up to be a leader of the world. Millions of people have followed Gandhi's inspiration, none of which would have happened unless he had prayed and taken on to himself the sufferings of others. For most of us, that very statement seems an impossibility. Oh, nobody can do that kind of thing. Well, he did, and therefore he inspires us to follow. Yeah.
It's so true. I mean, just the things that I've gotten to refresh my memory about and learn thanks to you and preparing for this segment, it has inspired me to reevaluate my own life and what's important and how I should be using my time here, because, you know, once it's over, you've missed your chance, so to speak. And your spiritual life is a big help in that, isn't it? Tell us about your own life as a Christian brother. How has your study of Gandhi affected you and your community, if at all?
Well, oddly enough, although I hadn't paid any attention to Gandhi at the time, see, I was 10 years old when they assassinated him in 1948. When I joined the brothers, I did so because of the great influence they had on me, a sort of teenager who was out of line, and they helped me get in line. One of the things that the brothers provided was 3 hours per day of prayer, and more on Sundays.
When did you do that?
Yeah, that was in 1957.
But I mean, when did you do your 3 hours? Throughout the day, or how did it work out?
Well, we began with a 2-hour prayer session. Okay?
In the morning?
In the morning, right, including the Holy Sacrifice of the Mass. And then we added a little bit of prayer time in the middle of the day and about an hour later on. So with all of this prayer, I began to overcome the various illusions that were particular to me. See? And I began to recognize, boy, that's a crock. You know, that doesn't fit at all. This is a very distracting aspect of my life, which I have to leave behind if I'm going to grow. So with that 3 hours of prayer, I began to become much more real in my own personal development. And I was able to see other people who came in just as I did, who were growing and developing. And so the community appreciation, see, grew and developed. There were 10 young men who joined the brothers with me, and we progressed, you know, stage by stage. Okay. So all of this was very helpful in becoming more real.
Because I remember, I don't mean to interrupt you, but we only have a couple minutes left, but I remember in your studies about communal prayer, how valuable it is to be part of a group, because it strengthens you, you have a chance to share with others, and it gives you more format and discipline in your life that I know from my own life, being alone in the world, you tend to get distracted much more readily, and the discipline comes more naturally when you're in a group. Is that correct?
Definitely. That's why he formed an ashram. That's why he laid out all of these very strict rules. And that's why if somebody in the ashram misbehaved, then everybody took on some of the making up for it. And Gandhi himself went on one of his longest fasts because of misbehavior of members of the ashram.
And we know that he did it almost to death in the formation of the modern state of India. Well, we've run out of time. I just raced by. We won't be able to cover everything here that Brother Brian will be covering at the Institute for Spirituality, but I encourage you to go to the website www.sfis.org, Santa Fe Institute for Spirituality.org. and you'll find the program being there, or call area code 505-473-6390, or you even get them through the College of Santa Fe if you need to do that, to find out what's going on here at the Institute for Spirituality, or if it's impractical or for you to come here, find some other location in your neighborhood that will help you in your spiritual life. I know it has helped me, and I encourage all of you in your spiritual life. So on behalf of everybody at Spirituality TV, I want to thank you, Brother Brian, for taking time out of your busy schedule to come and share with the folks here, and hope you'll come back again whenever you have some more to share with us.
Okay, be glad to do that.
Okay, great. So on behalf of everybody here, I want to thank you for watching today, and tell your friends about the program, and stay tuned next week for another program on spirituality.